Hello, this is Jessie Powell, and I am your host of From Trauma to Triumph. I am so glad that you are here and that you're joining me once again. This is episode 2. The first episode I dropped August the 12th. And with that episode, we really talked about my journey through trauma. I shared my story. I was open. I was authentic because I really wanted to take the mask off of trauma and how it can affect one's being and life. And it's really an identity thing. You get stripped of that and you have to rebuild yourself with really strong, intentional building blocks. So for this episode, I am so honored that we are going a step beyond me just sharing my story to inviting a specialist that I went in search of actually earlier in 2021 when I found out that what I had been going through for so many years was trauma. Her name is Michele Rosenthial, and she is a trauma specialist, a trauma recovery specialist. And we just totally were just connected instantaneously. And so what we did actually is we started my journey of trauma recovery with a recorded session, Zoom live session, where she was taking me through the steps of starting my trauma recovery. And when I tell you that it was so eye-opening, it's really starting the transformation of me coming into my own authentic self. So in this session, you are going to see, not only hear, but see myself as well as Michele taking me through this narrow path that leads to a path of unimaginable freedom. She's starting me on this journey. The title of this podcast is Healing After Trauma, Getting Started. So welcome, Michele. I am so glad that you are here. I am so glad that our paths crossed because it's not only going to be beneficial for myself, but I wanted to make this recording accessible to my listeners with this podcast. We're very intentional with being very open, and this is a very safe space where we will be asking you questions that you can answer yourself, and you can go through step-by-step healing of your own trauma. And she describes it brilliantly. She's helped thousands, and I know that this will be a blessing to you. So let's get started.
All right, so Jessie, I'm so excited to work with you today. You and I have this great connection. We've already talked so much about who you are and what you do. What I really have in mind for us today is for us to launch your trauma recovery in a very specific way. And so partly that's trauma education, is really understanding what is this, so that you know, so often we trauma survivors, we think we're all alone, like we're the only ones that have this feeling or this experience or that symptom. And the thing is, what I like to tell all of my clients as we get started, there's absolutely nothing you could say that I haven't already heard or felt myself. So as we go forward, there are 3 rules in this room. Rule number 1 is say it like you mean it. 0 filtering, absolutely 0 filtering. Rule number 2, just bring yourself honestly into this space with me. I'm going to do the same, because the more honest and transparent we both are, the more quickly we're going to get the results that you want. And rule number 3 is 0 apologizing. No apologies, because however you're feeling or thinking is valid. Everything in the post-trauma world is completely valid. So I've noticed over the years, so often, so many of us, we have a tendency to apologize. Well, this might sound crazy, or I know this is insane, or I'm sorry that I feel this way. Just eliminate all of this and just be you, okay?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so I always like to start with a little bit of trauma education, just so that we normalize trauma. Whenever I speak, I always start, whether it's an audience of 50 or 5,000, I start the same way. It's always with this little pop quiz. And I ask everyone in the audience to stand up. And I say, okay, now everyone who has ever had an experience that feels less than good, move to the right side of the room. And everyone who's ever had an experience that feels just fine, they've always only had experiences that feel great, move to the other side of the room. And inevitably, everybody laughs, right? Because eventually everybody moves to that right side of the room. And then you've got the whole crowd on that one side. And we all look to the other side and say, well, where are the people? Where are the people over there? And the only reason that it makes a real important difference to be able to see everyone on one side and no one on the other is this. The baseline definition of trauma is any experience that feels less than good. We don't talk about that much in our culture. The media certainly doesn't cover that. But the fact is, when you look at trauma that way, we are all trauma survivors. So I know you have your own reason for being here, and I know that you have your own symptoms and experiences and history. And where I want us to begin is from that place of being completely 100% in the same space together. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So with that in mind and understanding that trauma embeds deeply neurologically in the neural pathways of the brain, in the unconscious programs that we run. I saw a lecture by Bruce Lipton recently, and he was saying that 95% of the time, we are either thinking into the future or thinking into the past. 95% of the time. It's very interesting, right? Because that means 95% of the time we are not present in the moment. And the reason that that matters is because when you realize that, what's present in the present moment then is just 5% that's running your unconscious programs.
Wow.
Yeah, what does that make you think?
I'm not living my full life in the moment at all. It's caught back in the past, or it's caught way someplace in the future. So it's like I'm non-existent.
Wow, that's powerful. So you're right. And the opportunity here is where we begin. Because when you recognize that only 5% of your time is spent in the present moment, that means while you're somewhere else in the past or the future, something else is running who you are in the present moment. That's our unconscious programming.
Yes.
That's of course, that's, you know, what makes your heart beat, your lungs breathe and all that, but it's also how you respond to anything that happens to you. So our job here, the way that I like to think about it, is to bring that focus back from the past and back from the future, so you're more wholly in the present moment, which will allow you to be more in control of every experience that you have, more confident in any experience, and way more calm. Okay. So we do that in 3 phases, and today we'll launch this whole process, but I just sort of want you to know where the process goes, how it's sort of organized. So 3 phases of trauma recovery, according to me, right? This is how I like to approach it as a survivor myself, and as a practitioner who's been in the field for as long as I have. Here's what I see work: 3 phases. The control phase, where we really step into starting to reclaim control and starting to connect you actually more to the present moment. So in that space, the first thing is to connect. That's the most important thing. Now, you can't connect to your whole self and the present moment and all the good bells and whistles in the very first day, but what you can connect to wholly and completely is your desire for change. And that's where we'll really be focusing today.
Awesome.
And from there, you'll be moving into crafting your healing intention. And then from there, concentrating your focus. Because when you connect and then really craft and then concentrate, you're reclaiming control not only over who you are, although it is over who you are, because in every moment you're more connected to that space, but also the unconscious programming that's going on, because we're starting the process of change. Does that make sense so far?
Perfect sense. Yes.
And then we'll move into the change phase, which is where we're going to just rewire all the programming, and then the create phase of your post-trauma identity. So today, where I really want us to focus is on what you want. And you and I have talked a little bit about, what's bothering you. So let's start there. Let's start with you defining the problem. Because to me, we can talk about trauma symptoms as programs. We can talk about them as habits. I like to talk about them as problems that just need to be solved. And up until today, you may not have had the idea or the resources, or it may not have been the right time to find the solution to the problems that you've been carrying. But starting right now, that all changes in our collaboration.
Yes.
Before we begin, do you have any questions, anything you want to know, anything about trauma or the process or anything at all?
No, we've talked and I've got some clarity on where we're going and what we're doing. And I know that I'm in a safe space, so we're good.
Okay. All right, great. So here's what I'd like you to do is to just sort of focus on, your past, your present. And what I mean by that is, how your past is affecting your present. So as far as today, if you were going to describe the problem that needs to be solved, how would you put that into words?
It would be very simple for me. It would be triggers. Okay, triggers from my past that I'm not even aware of. I mean, I know actually what happened, what caused the trauma, and the symptoms that I'm left with, right? Anxiety, fear, fight or flight, depression, not being my authentic self, and really not sure of who that is, because all these gears in trauma, right? That keeps it rolling. It controls my reaction and how I'm going to respond or how I'm going to feel. And I feel like I don't have control. I don't have the control panel anymore, right? And I have to. It takes time for me to grasp a hold of where I'm at, and yes, I have control too. And that's even if I make that move. It depends on where the trigger is. So to the triggers, which is anxiety, depression. What do you call that when you're not being your authentic self, right? And you feel like you've got to wear a mask.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
That type of thing. And being an entertainer, we do that anyway, quite good. But you reach an age and you reach a point in your life where I'm at 59, where I don't want to function in that anymore. I want to be my authentic self. I want to find out who that really is. And the only way I can do that is being in my present.
That makes so much sense. And I love identity work. I think at the bottom of all trauma recovery, the two things that really have to be attended to is the trauma addiction. And that's the past that we just keep going back to over and over and over. It's like, did you go to the grocery store anytime this week?
Yes.
Do you keep replaying that in your mind?
On occasion, yes, I do.
What happened there that makes it stick?
Yeah, what I didn't get, right? I should have gotten this, or it's just like anything else that replays in your mind. That is a constant.
That's right. And it's usually, I shouldn't say always, because we can't really use absolutes, but usually when we replay something over and over, it's usually something that we did wrong. It's something bad. It's some bad outcome that we weren't expecting or that we didn't want. And so as you think about trauma recovery, it's figuring out what is that trauma addiction. I know in my own recovery, so I had a near-death experience, and I just replayed that moment over and over and over, not because the near-death was the problem. It was definitely the most amazing moment of my life. I loved it. It was incredible. And it was really hard to come back. What I replayed over and over was my lack of courage in that moment, the way I judged myself, because I wanted to die. I really wanted to die. And I was wholly giving myself over to that process. And I judged myself later, kind of person gives up, kind of person doesn't try to stay alive. And it was that judgment of myself that I just kept going back to over and over and over. And so it was that terrifying moment of really losing a sense of myself and then judging myself in the process. So you might start thinking about, what's your trauma addiction? What are those moments that you keep going back to? And generally speaking, they are often the ones that have the most intense emotion. Not a surprise, right?
Not a surprise at all. No.
Yeah. But when you think about those moments, something that you can start to assess for yourself is to think about, what is it about this moment that I'm so addicted to? Because unlike the grocery store, which a week or two from now, you will not still be fixated on what you didn't remember to get.
Correct.
You will have let that go.
Correct.
Unlike that, there is something about those past moments that your mind is completely addicted to going back to. And I just define addiction in its most simplest terms, which is when you feel compelled to do something that you know is not good for you and you just cannot stop doing it. Okay.
Correct. That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah. What do you think?
Definitely. When you say this, it reminds me of certain things. For instance, when I was in college. Okay. And I can see now the difference between the grocery store. You don't linger on that. You think, oh my gosh, I forgot that. And then it's over. Right. So there is a difference. But when you have a emotional attachment to something, right, it's different. So I remember being in college, and this is the first thing that came to mind, being in college, being in the Miss Black Western Kentucky pageant, right? And everybody just knew I was going to win because of my gift, my talent of singing, right? And I guess maybe my presence and talking, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, I felt very confident as well. But when I got on the stage and everyone was looking at me and they asked me a question, I froze. I don't even remember what answer I gave, right? This is like in 1980, the fall of 1980, right?
Yeah.
And I was so ashamed. I did not win. The other girl won. I was just so ashamed. And I felt like I was stupid. Why couldn't I? What happened there? I could talk any other time. What was different at this moment, right? And that's where the fear of speaking in public. Singing is one thing. Sorry about my dog. Singing is one thing, right? I'm in my element. I've been doing this since the age of 8. Speaking is another without singing. And I don't have that that I can just rest on. If I can find it, fine. So yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind. And when I'm talking about it now, I'm sweating. I feel the sensation and the symptoms from trauma.
So does your dog.
Yes.
When our energies change,
Wow.
and I have 2 therapy dogs that work with my clients, and Gibbs, who's in the hall right now, so he's a little quieter, is actually starting to do a little bit of barking, I think because he can hear your dog. So it's interesting how, dogs pick up our energy. And I wonder now, if you were just to take a deep breath, a deep breath, like a really long, slow, deep breath, just to sort of, as you release it, just move your lips together just to do and you could just do that maybe 2 more times, just to release all of that came up and reclaim control and presence in this moment. Yeah, that's right. Good.
Much better.
Yeah, and just notice how the dog got quiet. So, as you so beautifully expressed, it is those moments of those intense experiences, those intense emotions that embed and then have those long-lasting results, and also are the ones that our minds keep going back to. So the biggest traumas of all, you can already imagine, I bet, how the mind just gets addicted to sort of, we can't resolve it, we can't settle with it, so we just keep going back to it, just like, what is there, what's there, and we need it for whatever reason. The other element of trauma recovery that has to be satisfied to have long-lasting, sustainable results, my opinion, is the trauma identity, because we have an identity crisis after trauma.
Most definitely.
Tell me what you're thinking when you say that.
Yeah, that's what I've been in search of. You know, again, being an entertainer, you put on this mask and you do your thing, and I'm great on stage, and when I'm off stage, things happen, right, that I have no control of because I'm not in control. So that identity thing of knowing who I am, my authentic self at this stage in my life is very, very critical. And I don't want to live in feeling like I've got to live in the past for that to be my identity, because that is not my identity, right?
Right.
Nor do I want to project so much into the future, even though I do vision boards and I do affirmations and all of those things. But I think that they're not as powerful. They would be so much more powerful if I was in my authentic present self of knowing who I am today and who I am, period.
That makes total sense. So to bring this back then to what we were talking about, to me, all trauma recovery is really solving the problem of trauma as it lingers in your past. So you were saying that the problem is your triggers. Let's dissect that a little bit more, because within that, there are going to be thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and actions that expose the problem, or that allow you to embody the problem. So if you were to think of it that way in terms of defining the problem, what's the problem beyond triggers, taking that as your beginning and then dropping down to the next level into this level of thoughts, beliefs, actions, behaviors. Tell me some of the problem as it expresses itself.
Being around a lot of people at one time, if I don't know them, that's a different story, right? But then if I know them and I know certain situations have happened, right? I go back to that, thinking that that's going to be what happens this time. So I find myself going through anxiety attacks with that. And I've got to do self-talk, or I've got to get some holistic, something that's going to calm and bring ease to me. But that's only for a duration of time. And I'm always one to go ahead and face whatever is before me, right? At least I attempt to. Now, going into that environment, I get all the symptoms of sweating, of a heartbeat, of not being able to talk, of thinking people know exactly what's going on the inside of me, when they may not, but I know what's going on.
Yeah.
So it takes me a moment to bring myself to the center. But when I do, it'll take like maybe 15, 20 minutes, right?
Right.
But when I do, I'm okay. I click into gear into the person that I am, being very talkative, very friendly, and sometimes it doesn't lift. Sometimes it just stays present. And I've got to exit that environment.
Perfect.
That's one major thing.
Say that again.
That's one major thing that I deal with. And that's very uncomfortable for me.
Because what are you thinking at that time? Like if you had to tell me the thought that's most dominant in those moments when you're around all those people and it causes all of that anxiety and the rest of the triggers, what's the thought that most occurs to you? Or what's the thought at the base of all that?
Yeah, I think relationships, things that have transpired. Let me be honest. There's some jealousy there. There's some people that are not being authentic, right? And then I'm thinking, well, what is wrong with me? Do I need to lessen myself? Do I need to dumb myself down? Do I need to, in order for that acceptance to occur? Instead of being totally okay with who I am and what I present, how I'm created, and just, rocking with it, right? That eventually comes, but it takes a minute. Sometimes it doesn't. And I just have to exit that environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Total sense. Because one of the things that I'm also wondering, whenever we get activated after trauma, it's what I've noticed is it's usually because we're carrying some judgment of ourselves that lacks the full context of understanding that old moment. Like, just to go back to the example I was sharing with you, I judged myself so harshly. I was 13 at the time, so coping skills were at a minimum, and also my mature context of, well, what would a person who was dying and it had been, my trauma had been going on for weeks, so it was a medical trauma. So like, it wasn't, I was exhausted mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, in every sense. Who wouldn't in that moment want to just give up? I never allowed myself to see the fuller context. And in the moments of those intense emotions, the mind literally, when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, the eyes dilate. So you don't have peripheral vision. You only see what's right ahead, because that's exactly where the threat is.
Wow.
And you want a little anxiety hack. One thing that you can do to interrupt anxiety is put your hands up and then widen them all the way out. You're not going to see it off camera, but I'm as far wide as you can go, and attune yourself to your peripheral vision to see your hands as they stretch out on either side of you, because you will, in that sense, open up the rest of your capable attunement in the moment. And that immediately lessens.
Wow. So you're not stuck in that direct threat that's right before you. You widen the spectrum, right?
Exactly.
So you can see truth.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And so that you also can see everything that is not the threat. Because that's the biggest problem. We don't see everything that is not the trauma. And healing, reducing anxiety, is all about being able to see the rest, and starting in that space to recognize how to make that shift from powerless to powerful.
Yes, I like that.
Because when your vision is that narrow, you don't have access to all of yourself or all of your resources. When you widen it out, you start to have a fuller context, not only of the world, although it is that, and not only of other people, but also of yourself.
Yeah, and you're shutting down. It's like you're in a narrow space.
That's right.
Right? When you don't have that. So when you widen it, like you said, I get it. You see the whole spectrum.
That's right.
That there are safe places, that there is more.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Exactly.
Good. I'm going to start using that. I'm going to start using that technique, definitely.
Excellent.
I was looking for were tools, because that's what you have to get, are tools in order to move forward and do it in a healthy way.
That is very true. I have 2 videos I'm going to send you. One, they're both about anxiety hacks. One is about physical things you can do to divert the anxiety, and the second is mental hacks. So I'll send you both. You can think about this, how to apply this when you're around a group of people, because you may not be in a position to be like, okay, let me put my fingers up and let me widen my hands. You may not be able to do that if you're surrounded by a group of people. But what you can do, and you can try this right now, is to just in your mind start to widen your awareness to the edges of the room that you're in. Okay, just imagine that you can trace the edges of the room that you're in. And when you've got that done, let me know.
Done.
Okay, now expand your awareness to trace the edges of the building that you're in. You're in your home, so trace the edges of your home. Just, I don't know if it's a square or it has I worked with a client the other day, they have a turret, so but trace the outline. Okay, now go ahead, and if you know loosely the geography of the town you're in, go ahead and expand your awareness to trace the outline of the town. And if you don't know exactly the outline, I know the town I grew up in was in the shape of the number 7. But if you don't know the actual geography, just expand your awareness to the edges of the town, because you know where that town ends and another begins.
Mm-hmm.
Good. And now go ahead and expand your awareness to the edges of your state.
Mm. Wow, a lot of space.
Yeah, that's right. Now you want to make it a little better?
Sure.
Okay. Expand your awareness all the way past your state to the edges of the globe. You know what the world looks like, that blue and green sort of marble hung in the galaxy. Just go ahead and expand your awareness to the edges of the whole Earth.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah. And now let's just take it up even a little bit more. Just expand your awareness into the galaxy itself. And just let yourself go as far into the edges of that as feels appropriate to you in this moment.
It's amazing. It takes a minute to do, but you can if you really just center yourself and plug in.
Yeah. Thank you for just jumping in and doing it. And you're right, it does take a minute. Now, here's why. It takes actually more than a minute. And here's why it's perfect. It's what I call the 90-second rule, which is, scientifically speaking, a thought creates a physical reaction. So you have a thought that creates an electrical impulse in your brain that changes your neurochemistry. The neurochemical change sends a message from the brain down into the body. The body receives it as a sensation. The body processes that sensation and sends it back up to the brain. The brain receives that sensation and performs what's called a transderivational search. It's just a fancy term for the brain going back inside itself and lighting up all of its circuitry to say, where's the information that's similar to this? Which technically means, where are the neural pathways that hold an experience that felt this way? Once the brain identifies that, it makes a picture. Oh, here's the experience. Now here's where your control begins, because your mind comes in at that moment and says, oh, that picture, let me interpret it. And it will say, oh my God, that was the most amazing moment. I loved it. That feels amazing. Or it will look at that picture and say, that was the worst day of my life. Oh my God, I'm in real danger, or whatever it is. Based on the interpretation of your mind, that your mind is making to a picture that your brain just activated based on embedded neural networks.
Yes.
Your mind makes that interpretation. That interpretation brings you to have a feeling. That feeling leads to your behavior. Now, that's a rudimentary way of explaining things, but did that sound clear?
It does. It means that the whole of you is affected by it.
That's right.
Right, but it starts in the neural.
That's right. It starts with a thought.
Right, the thought.
And that's why spending 2 or 3 minutes expanding your awareness is perfect, because that whole neurochemical cascade that I just described, that thought creates an electrical impulse that changes the neurotransmitters, and the neurotransmitters spike up to send that message into the body. That whole spike comes down and ends in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. This is not my theory. This is science. There's a great TED Talk by Jill Bolte Taylor where she talks about this and describes the process of the brain. And she wrote a great book called A Stroke of Insight. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't, but I'm going to check it out.
It's phenomenal. Here's why it's so important for us. Because understanding that that thought creates that neurochemical spike for only 90 seconds means that in 90 seconds, that anxiety that you're talking about, that increased heartbeat that you're experiencing, that ends in 90 seconds. 90 seconds, just a minute and a half.
That makes total sense. That makes total sense.
And now here's the caveat. That neurochemical spike ends in 90 seconds only if you stop thinking the thought that started it all.
Wow.
And that is why any intervention that takes more than 90 seconds is so useful. So if it takes 3 or 4 minutes to be able to expand your awareness out of, I mean, you could start with just doing the edges of your brain, and then, the edges of your skull, and then the edges of the room, then the edges of the building, and then the edges of your neighborhood, and the edges of your town. And we could put in so many layers. By the time you're done with all of that, it's been way more than 90 seconds.
Yes.
I'm a bit of an overachiever, so I like that. And what you've effectively done is hijack that thought and replaced it with a controlled state of concentrated focus that you have chosen.
In the moment, in this moment.
Exactly.
Love it.
So right.
Love it. Love it. Love
Yeah.
it. I cannot wait to I try that. That's awesome. And so you're taking your control back.
Exactly. Making that shift from powerless to
powerful.
Over and over, and training your brain in the process, right?
The word powerless is actually how you feel. You feel like you have no control over the thought that you've tapped into, right? That creates all this process that you just spoke of, and that you so brilliantly defined, right? How it works. But it makes perfect sense. Powerless. Yeah. To powerful, right?
Yeah.
And that's tapping into your authentic self and your identity. It all ties into all of that.
That's right.
When you're stripped of it, when you go through that trauma, like molestation that I went through many, many times, right? You feel powerless. That is absolutely right. But you don't have to stay there. You can control that thought, and you can change the reaction to it.
Absolutely. You're so on it. So bringing this back then to starting to formulate exactly where you're going in your process and defining the problem. And what you had said was, what is wrong with me, which I think is such a powerful statement in our powerlessness, because essentially that's so universal. You, like me, had the same idea, like there's something wrong with me in this moment, whether it's one trauma or another.
Oh my word. The
so
first
often
part
we
of
as trauma
this
survivors
healing
blame
after trauma
ourselves. And when we blame
was
ourselves,
very
we get
educational
stuck.
for me.
And
Being
you have
with
a lot of
recovery
Yes.
Shame is a
specialist
key word
that
for me.
has
Very
studied
true.
this for
Why can't I
years
control
is
it? What is
incredible.
wrong with me? And we
for her to
think
have the
that we're
compassion
crazy, that we're
she
losing
has,
our minds.
and the
That
way
is
to
right.
share the
That is right.
information to where
So
anyone
with the
could
problem
understand. No big
defined,
words here.
right? That
Some
sense of
scientific
shame,
words
that idea
that
of what's wrong with
she
me,
definitely
the
shared, but
triggers that are out of
but Michelle
control.
was just connecting
Now
the
let's
dots
start
to
moving into
give us more of an
the solution.
understanding of how we can heal from an ordeal trauma, right? And anything that doesn't feel good is a trauma. Different levels of it, but it's still valid, and you can still find healing and a life afterwards. Michele Rosenthial is just incredible. She's also an amazing author. I recently ordered her Your Life After Trauma book, and I can't wait to put my fingers around it and start allowing her information to pour into me to bring about even a quicker response to healing. I encourage you to really, really check it out. And the one thing I wanted to tell you is that even though we're doing this trauma work, the thing is looking forward, but we've got to deal with our stuff in the past that's caused us to feel the way that we do, right? I've done a lot of work, and this is just another process of my journey. So I encourage you, as I'm doing the work, for you to do the work. As I was answering the questions, pause this, and answer the question for yourself with whatever you may be facing now that is trauma related. For more information about Michele Rosenthial, go to www.mytraumacoach.com, www.mytraumacoach.com, or you can reach her at Michele, that's with one L, at mytraumacoach.com, Michele at mytraumacoach.com, and her credits will be definitely below. You're listening to, guys, From Trauma to Triumph. My name is Jessie Lane Powell. I am your host, and I want to thank you again for listening. I want you to take care. Remember to subscribe to this channel and make sure to tell your friends and your family about that. Anyone that you know that's going through any type of ordeal, because it could be trauma related, and we have the resources, and we want to give you the tools that you need in order to live a fruitful, freer life. Okay. And remember, you are on the edge of a miracle. You are on the edge of a change. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.